This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
Alrighty, welcome to episode 100 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contes, and this week we are joined by former full-time IndyCar driver and a current racing analyst for Fox. He will be on the call with Will Buxton and Townsend Bell for the Indianapolis 500 Sunday, May 25th on Fox. He is James Hinchcliffe. James, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. What is more fun, preparing to drive in the Indy 500 or preparing to call it?
Well, one's more stressful than the other, I can tell you that. They're both fun. I mean, you're preparing in different ways, but honestly, with a lot of the same kind of approach to it, which is prepare. That's what it's all about, whether you're racing in it or whether you're calling in it, or calling it, I should say. It's, it's the biggest race in the world, so you don't want to mess it up. You want to have your facts straight. You want to make sure you put your best foot forward. So it's, yeah, a lot of prep going into it, but I'm looking forward to it.
You retired from full-time racing in 2021, but you still drive. You're not retired from racing altogether, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Where are you driving?
So I still race in the IMSA series, which is a kind of sports car endurance racing. So the kind of 12, 24-hour races, things like that. So a few times a year, I still get to, put on a race suit, strap on a helmet, and go have some fun.
How different is that from IndyCar? Like what is the competition like?
The competition is incredibly fierce, but it's a very different form of motorsports, because you take the obvious difference in the car. I race a GT3 car, so it's based off a road car, very different from a single seater open wheel car like an Indy car. And then the other kind of big one is because it's endurance racing, you share the car with other drivers. So in open wheel, you are the only driver, you're hyper focused on yourself and your own performance. But in sports car racing, it's kind of cool because you have to work with these other drivers. You've got to find compromise on setups. You're actually trying to help somebody else, which is nothing like what you want to do in open wheel racing. So it's a different dynamic.
Have you thought about trying to return to IndyCar? Like, can you envision yourself ever racing in the Indy 500 again?
No, I left that window open for a few years when I stopped full time, but I would say the window's pretty firmly shut now, and really enjoying being on the broadcast side and working with everybody at Fox on trying to bring people great shows of IndyCar racing every week.
What kind of training would it take to get back into it? Like say you decided that you did want to get back into it and wanted to try to compete in IndyCar. How long would it take? What would it take to get back to that?
Well, because I'm still driving a little bit, I kind of maintained a fair amount of my, routine and regimen, not as strict as when I was doing it full time. But, honestly, it would take a lot of neck work. That's one thing I've kind of let fall by the wayside because sports car racing doesn't put the same kind of demands on your neck as an IndyCar does. But I bet it would take, a month of specialized training and one day in the car, and I'd feel, comfortable and
Oh,
back
wow.
up to speed.
Is it harder to race as a part-time driver? Like, do you lose any of your reaction time or even your nerve?
Not those. Those things I think stay pretty consistent, especially on the reaction time side. If you're still working
Yeah.
on it, which I still do, nerve. I don't think drivers ever lose their nerve. I think we're born wrong and we're wired wrong and we're missing that part anyway. So I don't think you ever lose that. It's just it's the routine, it's the repetition, right? If you took any athlete, basketball player, football player, golfer, and said, "Hey, you get to do this. You get to play today, but you don't get to play again for another 4 months, and then you're going to play again in another 3 months."
Yeah.
You're not going to be as good as someone that's playing every weekend. So I think that's the hard part about being part time is just trying to jump in these infrequent sort of intervals.
The same way that boxers have to learn to take a punch. Did you as a driver, do you almost like have to learn how to get into a car crash? Like do you have to
That's
at
a
some point
great question.
accept that it's just like part of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think every driver acknowledges that's part of the deal, and there's really no driver that hasn't had, their own collection of crashes. That's part of the learning process coming up, and even in the highest levels, there's nothing you can really do to train for it or prepare for it,
Yeah.
mentally or physically. It's just one of those things you got to learn the hard way, and yeah, it sucks. I can tell you that.
How vividly do you remember the 2015 crash before the Indy 500?
Honestly, mercifully, I don't remember it at all. I
Mm,
was I was so concussed in that accident that I've got no memory of what happened. As far as I was concerned, I was driving my car and everything was great. I blinked and I woke up in hospital, 12 hours later, whatever it was. So for me, thankfully, I don't have any memory of it, so I don't ever have to kind of relive it or go through that. I can watch the video. It doesn't bother me because it doesn't feel like me in the car.
yeah. Did you question whether you wanted to race again after that?
Never. When I woke up, I couldn't talk. I had a tube down my throat, so they gave me a pen and a piece of paper. And the third question that I wrote down on a piece of paper was, "When can I get back in the car?" So I didn't even know what was fully wrong with me yet. I wasn't even entirely sure I was going to recover yet because I didn't know what my injuries were.
Yeah.
But I was still immediately asking, when are you going to get me back into a race car?
And when you did get back in, you were completely comfortable?
Totally comfortable. I mean, the one thing about it is, to drive a car on the limit, you do have to kind of push your mind and your body beyond what it wants to do. The human brain is designed to keep the human body safe. And at some point when you're driving a race car, the brain acknowledges what you're doing is no longer safe. And drivers are just able to kind of push that back and really kind of push through that natural boundary that should be there. My only worry about getting back into a race car was that something subconsciously was going to be holding me back a little bit. It's not that I didn't want to get in the car, it's not that I wasn't willing to put the car on the line, but to be in that, top 1 percentile of professional drivers, you have to be willing to absolutely put everything out there. And if something in the back of my brain subconsciously was not going to let me push that limit or take that risk, then I would never have been able to race again. Luckily, as soon as I got in the car, I felt good and it felt like that nothing was holding me back and we were able to keep going.
So how do you push through boundaries as a race car driver? Do you almost have to reconcile with the fact that you could get in the car and never be able to go home?
Yeah, I think drivers in general try to not think about it as much as they can, but I think any driver would be lying if they said they never thought about it. And certain drivers maybe more than others. For me, I can remember times in my career where I had that thought. I had that discussion with myself, like, "Hey, if something happens and you don't come home today, are you okay with that?" And the answer was always yes. So I think anytime you get to the point where you stop feeling like you're okay with taking that risk, you immediately have to hang up the helmet and stop racing. And obviously, I was able to get back in the car. I raced for another 6 years, whatever it was, um, and never really thought twice about it. So I think when I decided to stop even, it was less about, there were other factors that came into play, and it was less about, the thought of maybe not coming home one day, as selfish as that can sound to somebody, especially if you've got a family.
So how did you make the decision to retire from racing full time and to start focusing on broadcasting?
Well, I had always kind of had it in the back of my head that I wanted to explore the broadcasting route when I stopped driving. So when I made the decision, which came from a collection of factors, at the end of the day, the simplest way to sum it up is it takes a lot of effort to be a competitive IndyCar driver. And the reward that I was getting, the satisfaction that I was getting from being there no longer added up. It didn't equal the effort that was going into it, if that makes sense. The sport had changed a bit, the cars had changed a bit. Personally, professionally, things were happening in my life that just made me realize there were other ways that I wanted to kind of spend my time and focus my energy. So that was the decision. And as soon as that decision was made, it was real easy. Called the broadcast partner of IndyCar at the time and said, "Hey, look, I'm thinking of stopping." And they said, "Hey, we'd love to have you." And that was kind of how it started.
What is your comfort level, just being that you are a former IndyCar driver, and you've raced with drivers that are still competing today? What is your comfort level of being critical of drivers?
It was one of the first questions I was asked when I was talking about joining the broadcast. Is they said, "Hey, are you willing to call your friends out for doing something wrong?" And I said, "Hey, man, I'll call it how I see it." And I try very hard to kind of be unbiased. That's my role as an analyst. I'm supposed to analyze what I'm seeing on the racetrack. So Yeah, I've had to call out friends before. I'm friends with most of the guys that are racing, but there are times when mistakes get made. Sometimes drivers are willing to put their hands up themselves and admit those mistakes. More often than not, they don't. But my job is to kind of help the audience understand what's happened on the track, and more than anything, almost let them make up the mind themselves.
What was the feeling when you went into the booth the first time to call an IndyCar race after retiring?
Well, it was nerve-wracking for sure. There's a lot of pressure to that, but I also kind of liked that element of it. There's something about live sport, live TV that is really exciting. It gives you a little bit of that rush that you're used to having from being an athlete. It was weird. First practice was weird, not being in the car and watching from the sidelines. But by the time the race came along, I felt very comfortable. I felt like I was in the right place. And it was just kind of getting up to speed with how it works and the do's and don'ts and kind of, trial by fire a little bit.
Have you found that broadcasting is fulfilling?
Very much so. Like I said, the thrill of, the red light going on and knowing that for these next few hours, there's no mistakes, there's no redos, you are on, things are gonna, come your way. You're gonna be throwing curveballs. You have to, as a team, figure out how to handle that. Um, that part, really interests me and excites me and fulfills me in that sense. And I think the other part about it is, broadcast is obviously a huge team. There's a lot of people involved, and you get that sort of team feeling the same way you did after a good race. You couldn't wait to go high five all your crew guys back in pit lane. After a great broadcast, you love going back to the compound and getting everybody a hug and saying, "Hey, great job! Like you did that well. You did that well. This was awesome. Let's do that again next week." So I think that side of it makes it very fun for me.
How is working with Danica Patrick, who's also at Fox?
Jetica's great. I mean, I've known her for years. Like, I got to race against her in IndyCar before she went over to NASCAR, and then I actually moved into her ride. I took over the GoDaddy car in IndyCar when she switched over, so we had the same sponsor for a while. So I've got to know her a little bit from that side of things, and we both do some F1 broadcasting as well. We've worked together on the 500 a bunch of times now, so it's great having her on the show.
Because that GoDaddy car was so well known when she was driving in it, and then you replaced it, did that help you get an early popularity boost in your career?
Huge,
Yeah.
absolutely. I was stepping into the most kind of iconic car of the era, following the most popular driver of the era. I got a built-in fan base. I think kids loved the bright color. I think
Yeah.
I immediately had, like the 10 and under demographic in IndyCar, which was cool. And we poked some fun at the whole thing. My first driver intros, I wore like a long black wig onto the stage and kind of had some fun with it. And Danica and I made some jokes about that. And GoDaddy was such a great partner as well. They really supported their athletes in a huge way, and they really kind of utilized us in a lot of ways that helped kind of raise our profile. So that combination of things, definitely, I went from kind of a nobody rookie who had done 1 year in the series to overnight stepping into a pretty big program.
How does working with Fox compare to working with NBC?
There's a lot of similarities, certainly a couple differences. And for me, it's great because I'm still relatively new in my TV career, right? I'm new to this industry. So my initial experience, I did 3 years with NBC on the IndyCar side. I've got to dabble in some Formula One stuff now, which is kind of different in its own right because it's more of a streaming service that we work for rather than a network broadcast. Now working with Fox, who are, so synonymous with sports and big sporting events. It's great for me to get to see how different people work and different ways you can do things because, coming in, I only knew one, the first thing that I did, right? So it's been great, and the enthusiasm from everybody at Fox has been next level. I mean, I think that's been, the biggest thing that we've all noticed is everybody in the company, and a lot of people that either didn't really know IndyCar that well, or in some cases didn't know motorsports at all that well, have really, really embraced this program and have really become fans of the sport. I see their passion growing every day. I see their knowledge growing every day. They'll make comments or ask questions. I'm like, that's a great question. Someone's paying attention. This is great. And as someone that grew up loving IndyCar racing, making a career out of IndyCar racing, having, being able to witness all these people have that kind of passion for my sport, what I like to call my sport, has been great. So I think we've really elevated the broadcast in a lot of ways, and we're just getting started.
It is. It's tough to please everyone still. Like last week, Dale Earnhardt Jr. He had commented that he's already expecting some negative feedback to Prime Video's first NASCAR race. So how has the response been to Fox's first season broadcasting IndyCar? Have there been those criticisms?
For sure, you're going to get that, right? I think Dale makes a great point. People don't like change
Yeah.
ultimately. But at the same time, people adapt pretty quickly. And so what went from, people maybe not liking something just because it was different has really turned into people appreciating the effort that Fox has put in to make it better. And I think, our team and our group has continued to improve. We've brought more and more to the broadcast every week. We've been improving. It was a first race back in St. Pete for a lot of people. And so there's going to be teething problems, but I think we've weathered them really well. And I think the fans have really, really responded well. So we saw some of that off the top, but that's to be expected. But I've been really happy to see the feedback, especially as we go towards the 500. That's the biggest race of the year. It's our Super Bowl, it's our Wimbledon, take your pick. And throughout practice week, now that we've got through qualifying weekend, the response has been overwhelmingly great. And I'm excited because we've got some really cool things that are going to be on the broadcast that are kind of firsts for the 500, and that's exciting for me, and I think exciting for the fans watching at home.
Does it help that Fox is so closely associated with racing and motorsports? Obviously, having NASCAR for as long as it has.
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. I mean, racing is such a different sport than kind of the other stick and ball sports, right?
Yeah.
You can bounce between, I feel like a hockey broadcast or a basketball broadcast or a baseball broadcast, and it's a little more similar. Racing is just so off kind of in its own world that not having any racing knowledge coming in would make it really difficult to do this show well. But we have a lot of people, on the program that have had extensive, experience in motorsports. Obviously, Fox's experience with NASCAR is invaluable, not just from the production side, but also the promotion side. It's been great seeing all the IndyCar commercials on NASCAR races and, us pumping up NASCAR events. We had Joey Logano join us in the booth over practice weekend as well. So I think that their experience in motorsports has been a big asset.
All right, let's talk about some storylines heading into the race. So, what happened with Joseph Newgarden's car? Like, if you could just, I guess, explain what the penalty was for and what the penalty is to start.
So the short version of a very long story is there are parts on the car that are supplied by IndyCar that are what we call spec. They are to a specification. They're the same for everyone, and you cannot alter them. And on two of the Penske cars, they had made alterations. So it's a black and white rule, regardless of what the intention was behind it. It's pretty clear cut. So those two cars were excluded from the qualifying, basically, and they go from their potential qualifying spots up in the top 12 to starting last and second last in the race.
So does the punishment fit the crime?
That's a nuanced answer. Them getting tossed out of qualifying, yes, absolutely. The tricky part is that Indy's got a very unique qualifying format in that there are 2 days, and they passed tech and were cleared after that first day, which essentially locked them into a top 12 starting spot. So my personal opinion, the way that I read the rules, I think it's more on IndyCar for not catching it the first day. And once they made the results official on Saturday, it kind of is what it is. They found it on Sunday, which meant that they shouldn't have been able to start higher than 11th and 12th. But in my opinion, they should have been able to start 11th and 12th. They decided to go hard on them for a bunch of different reasons, and they're now starting at the back.
Does the modification that was made, does it create an advantage? Like, do you see it as a big deal?
I do not see it as a big deal. No. Does it create an advantage? It was done with the intent to create an advantage. It was the kind of thing that in isolation would make almost no difference. It would be almost imperceptible. But what IndyCar teams do at the Speedway is if you get 10 things that are just a fraction, well, okay, then maybe you have something worth doing there. And I think it was a very small part of a much bigger process of trying to make that car fast at the Speedway, and don't think on its own would have much effect on performance. But That's not the point. The
Yeah.
point is you can't change it, and it was changed, so they absolutely should have been penalized.
And were the same modifications made to Newgarden's car last year at the Indy 500 and it just wasn't caught?
I have not looked at old photos from last year, but there are reasons to believe there is speculation out there that that part had also been altered last year, um, and that there's a chance it had been altered for a while, as Penske claimed that they didn't realize this was an issue and it was kind of part of their normal process for fitting that part to the car. So there's a chance, but it wasn't caught. The race is official. It is what it is.
So if they were able to confirm that the part was altered, like does that change anything with what happened last year? Like do they vacate the win or add an asterisk or anything? Should anything like that be done?
Officially, no. In the court of public opinion, people are going to have their say,
Yeah.
and that's the hard part for Joseph and for the team, because like I said, do I if it was on the car last year, do I think it played a part in him winning that race? I do not. I think more of the issue is with IndyCar for not finding it in their tech inspection. But again, these are very complicated machines. There's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of rules to try to follow. It is a tough situation. I kind of understand it from all sides, but um, I don't personally think it makes a big difference. And what's done is done. The race is official. If you weren't caught then, and it sounds bad to say, but in racing, everybody pushes the limits on the rules.
Yeah.
And if you don't get caught, that's kind of one of the risks that people take.
How was this found after the inspection?
My understanding is it was one of the team members from a rival team spotted it when Will Power's car was sitting in the qualifying line ready to go out.
So somebody else, another team saw it and then reported it.
Yes, IndyCar claimed that they had noted it through tech inspection, but
Oh,
it was
okay.
something that they were going to revisit in post-qualifying tech when they had more time.
Is it a bad look for the sport that Newgarden drives for Team Penske and Penske also owns IndyCar and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway?
It's not a great look.
Yeah.
I think it's been, a topic of discussion over the last few years. I don't know of any other professional sporting body where the owner of the sport and the series also owns a team. I don't think the track part plays a huge element to it, to be honest. I think it's more having the series and a team that competes in the series under the same ownership brings up a lot of questions of conflict of interest. It has since the day that Roger Penske bought the series, and unfortunately, in the last 36 months, there's been a few incidents that have really brought that to the forefront and have made people make calls for a potential change in the future.
As a former driver yourself and then now as an analyst, do you think that Penske should be able to own a team and the series?
No, I don't. From either position.
Yeah.
Roger Goodell doesn't own a football team. Adam Silver doesn't own a basketball team. I don't know of any professional sport where that happens, and I think it actually hinders IndyCar's, legitimacy on the global sporting platform operating the way that we currently are. I have so much respect and appreciation for what Roger Penske did in purchasing the series and getting IndyCar through COVID and through some very difficult times. But at some point, I think a decision needs to be made on what's more important to him, the team or the series, and kind of has to choose one.
Is this something that'll likely get discussed on the Fox broadcast on Sunday? Just the whole thing with the penalty for Newgarden and stuff like that?
The penalty is the story of the race.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We're going to have to talk about that. You've got Joseph going for history to be the first driver with 3 consecutive wins at the 500. His chances of doing that get dealt a pretty big blow by starting on the last row. So for sure, it's a topic of discussion. But at the end of the day, once the green flag drops, we're calling the race, and that's where the focus is.
Can IndyCar request that you guys don't talk about it?
That's above my pay grade. I'm a driver analyst. That's all.
Yeah.
I talk about what's happened on the racetrack. I don't know what kind of conversations like that happen.
How much harder is it now for Newgarden to win his third in a row?
Look, it's hard, but it's not impossible. Indy is a very unique place, and being such a long race, anything can happen. And that car and that driver have looked very competitive throughout practice. Um, they were definitely going to be, a threat for pole position had they been allowed to qualify. So I think with 500 miles, one of the best race teams, one of the best strategists, one of the best teams in pit lane, and one of the best drivers in the series right now, anything's possible, and it's going to be fun to watch him try to work his way up.
What are the chances that Elio Castroneves becomes the first to win the Indy 500 5 times?
As good as anyone's.
Yeah.
Elio is such an incredible guy, incredible driver, and I think a lot of people wouldn't have bet money on him winning his fourth back in 2021. So long after his third, but he defied the odds there, and there's nothing saying he couldn't do it again on Sunday.
How difficult is what Kyle Larson is trying to do, racing in the Indy 500 and then going to Charlotte to race in NASCAR?
Incredibly challenging, and I think everyone in the paddock's got a ton of respect for Kyle for trying to make it happen. He's incredibly talented driver, but I know how tired I was after every Indy 500 I raced. I can't imagine then hopping on a plane, flying to Charlotte, and doing 600 miles in a stock car.
Does the temperature change things? Like it's supposed to be in the low 60s on Sunday, would be one of the coldest Indy 500s ever. Does that change how you plan for the race and how things just kind of happen in the race?
Yeah, ultimately, I think it'll help lead to a more exciting race. Cooler temperatures usually means the cars have a bit more grip, and a bit more grip gives drivers a bit more confidence to try to make moves stick. So, cool temperatures can often lead to some pretty exciting racing.
Why does IndyCar have gaps in its schedule? Like where NASCAR races pretty much every week, and then IndyCar can have, a 3-week break.
Yeah, I think the goal for the IndyCar schedule eventually is to kind of keep it as, one race on, one race off, and be a little bit more on a cadence like that. Obviously, one of the big mandates was to try to be done with our season before football starts, because when it does, Sundays in America are about football, not about motorsports, and that's totally understandable. So we've had to condense the schedule, which makes sense, but there are some of those big gaps early in the season. Now we're into a phase where we're racing almost every week. And I think IndyCar has a lot of plans to try to fill some of those early season gaps over the next few years, but you can't just create races out of thin air. These things take some time to get together, but I'm confident the schedule will keep looking better and better over the next couple of years.
James, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
That is James Hinchcliffe. I'm Brandon Contes. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening and be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.